Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I can hear you. Fantastic. I just want to make sure that that I didn't screw up the sound for the third time, but we're live. Hello, welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
and I am your co-host Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 3, Part 1. Before we do that, Buddy, what's the most this podcast?
We've made this so difficult for ourselves, like the way that we're talking about these MCU movies.
Well, it's less difficult in that we only have to do 3 of these at a time instead of like an entire phase, right?
That's
like,
true.
Talking about 6 movies in 60 minutes would tall order, I think. But anyway, so today we're going to talk about Captain America: Civil War, Doctor Strange, and Guardians of the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
That order, right? That's the order. Yeah.
Yes.
Took some time over a well-deserved Thanksgiving break to relax and enjoy the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I guess let's just start with Civil War. Spoilers for all these movies. In a word, what's your top line reaction to Civil War?
I really want to just say bad. Is that too mean? I had a very hard time with Civil War. Civil War plummeted in my kind of estimation, which I've seen it afterwards. So I remember seeing Civil War and I thought I liked it. I was like, oh, like this is okay. This like works for me. Then I remember I saw it again and I was like, I don't love this. And I like kept thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more I didn't like it. And when I watched it, I was expecting to sort of have this, like a lot of the times when I am in that headspace, I have this thing when I watch a movie like that, and I then see all the good stuff that I had forgotten about, right? So like when I remember the movie, I think about all the bad stuff, right? And then I actually sit down later and I'm watching through the thing, I'm like, oh yeah, like that's pretty good. Pretty okay. Like, oh, I remember really liking that part, like all this stuff I had forgotten about. For Civil War, it was almost kind of like all of the bad stuff that I remembered was worse than I remembered it. And then there was all this other stuff that I was just like, this is terrible. So I just like really did not like it. It was a very, very poor experience.
All right, I'm excited to jump into that because like I thought it was all right. The thing that stuck out to me the most about it, honestly, was that it really felt like Age of Ultron Part 2 in terms of like themes and like where it was going, because it's more about like the fallout of Sokovia. But like we discussed last time, Sokovia, like Ultron itself, was about kind of the fallout of being like the Avengers, right? Like it was like it was focused on saving people rather than on it's like. In this one, they're going to focus on making sure the civilians don't get hurt. And then the next movie is like, guess what? It didn't happen, even though it looked like they did. They didn't actually do that, right? Like,
this is one of my core problems with it, is that it feels weird. I wrote in my notes, like, this State Department lady has nothing. Like, Sokovia was an homicidal threat. Everyone on the planet was gonna fucking die. And you want to tell me that, like, a couple of boulders falling on a bit, like, it's just ridiculous. Like, the calculus that is at play. And the movie agrees with that viewpoint, but it's just like, it's so limp-wristed that it makes me furious.
I mean, so I think that it doesn't aggravate me. So like the State Department thing, maybe, but like the part of this that's like, like this mother is irrationally angry. That's not a thing that like that's a thing that speaks true to me, right? Like, even if it's justified, right? Like the fact that happened and it bothered this woman immensely makes sense, right? Like to me, especially for I guess someone in this, like someone who's doesn't want to place their trust in superheroes, right? Like that feeling, even if it's not rational, makes sense to me. And Tony's reaction to it, I think, also makes some sense to me. But
I do agree with that, and I do want to be clear that I think, like, in a philosophical sense, it works, right? When it is Tony and Cap talking later in Berlin, right? And like Cap has done whatever, and Tony is trying to get him signed. That conversation is actually the very best part of Civil War. That is like Civil War at its peak, right? Because it is divorced from the actual sort of like material reality that they are both living in, right? The thing that sucks with General Ross, Secretary Ross, right? He's the Secretary of State in this. Is that he's like showing you like pictures or whatever from the Avengers movie, from the fallout of Winter Soldier or whatever, and it's kind of just like it rings insanely hollow, and it just bothers me to my absolute core. Which to be honest, I get it in a certain sort of sense, and I don't know that I like blame the filmmakers or whatever. Like this is bad, and I think it's bad, obviously, but I think it actually does come from a place like outside of that, where it is like it's not like irresponsibility from the filmmakers. I think it is irresponsibility almost from like the fans or like us as a like as a movie watching community, kind of like asked for this in a way that I think is pretty harmful and stupid.
What do you mean by
That's my
that?
hot take.
Kind of.
Okay, so Lindsay, the best way I can explain this is with another movie. Lindsay Ellis has a video about the Beauty and the Beast remake, where she talks about how the thing that sucks about the Beauty and the Beast remake is that movie goes out of its way to like correct a bunch of plot holes in the original movie, but like the act of like nitpicking and correcting these little nitpicks in the original movie just destroys the original movie's kind of like magic, right? That you actually shouldn't really listen to the criticisms of pedantic fuckboys on the internet who are making CinemaSins type videos about, oh, actually it's about Stockholm syndrome or whatever. You know what I mean? Because like at the end of the day, that makes the story worse. And I feel like it's the same sort of thing. I think focusing on civilian casualties in this way, and specifically in this way, by the way, I feel like you could have taken like other, like there could be other ways to tackle this problem, like the Civil War comic book, for instance, actually, that are much more like feasible. Tackling the civilian casualties this way, I think, is something that came out of the fans, right? That like fans got angry at the amount of collateral damage that was happening in these superhero movies, and so this is sort of a response to that. But the response to that actually is no fun and not interesting and bad. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not convinced that that's like why this happened. I think that Civil War was a very popular comic, right? And this was an easy way to like sideways into that, right? Like this is a way to do.
Well, so this is the thing. I think the Civil War comic does it right. The thing that the Civil War comic does is it doesn't do it with the Avengers. It does it with a bunch of C-list heroes who are legitimately dangerous and reckless and fuck up in a gigantic way, right? Like these are people who are glory hounds. All they want, they're filming a reality TV about their shitty superhero team or whatever, and they get a school full of children, 800 children killed. That is a perfect way to set up this sort of thing, because it's not the Avengers' fault, right? Like the Avengers are also in this world and also in this category of superheroes, but the reason that registration comes about is because there are other bad actors in the superhero community, right? And so if the Civil War movie wanted to take a similar tact, I would absolutely agree. But the Civil War movie takes the tact that, oh, actually, when a couple of people get rocks dropped on them on a gigantic alien invasion that threatens to destroy the whole world, right? That's the real problem. And not even, okay, so the other thing is that I watched these movies so close together. The real thing that killed me here is that in the Avengers movie, the government that would be sanctioning the Avengers, who are now asking the Avengers for restraint, is also the government that fired a nuke at New York City. And it's just like, this is ridiculous. I can't possibly handle it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm showing a little bit of my hand there, but like governments being hypocritical is not a thing that seems unrealistic to me. But
okay, that's fair. I get that.
But just like so, I take all of what you're saying, and I think it's right. I just kind of wanted. I don't think I agree with the idea that you're presenting, which is that this was as a result of like fan complaining. I think this was just like a way to shoehorn in Civil War in a way that didn't require them to like make a movie about C-list heroes or like do it in a smaller way.
I guess I agree with that. It's not insanely well supported. It's just kind of like a gut feeling, I guess.
No,
so I don't really have better proof than just I don't know, the correlation that's there.
That's fair. That's fair.
But I think the real thing, and this is completely different, the real thing that this made me feel, though, is so okay. Do you remember in Infinity War? We talked about Infinity War, and we talked about how Infinity War didn't get the Guardians of the Galaxy and didn't get Thor, and kind of ruined Thor and ruined the Guardians. And that really sucked, right? It felt like these characters kind of got ruined for like drama. That like their drama got spent prematurely or in a really bad way. This is the core thing that really like this is the new thing. This is the thing that I remember having these same complaints about the kind of like the fundamentals of the consequences of the civilian fallout, when we reviewed this movie 4 years ago, right? But the thing that I don't remember is this feeling of they took something I liked and ruined it, right? In this case, it was the Avengers, right? They took that Avengers dynamic I liked a lot and they kind of ruined it in a way. And that's the thing that really drove Civil War down that I didn't remember. And this time watching it, I was like, this feels exactly like what Civil War did to the Guardians of the Galaxy, right? Where it just like ripped the whole team apart kind of out of nowhere, and it just didn't feel congruous with the world and the characters that had like come before it. Which isn't to say that like the characters themselves make sense, and it like I think Captain America, right? In this movie, Tony Stark in this movie, they have a real sort of like through line or whatever. But like the Avengers as a unit just don't feel like the same Avengers that were in Ultron to me, which is what really hurts. That's the thing that really sucks. Do you know what I mean?
I think I get that. Yeah. I mean, I think they probably move too fast. I think this is also a problem I have with Guardians 2. Talk about that later, but like there's like, because they want to get to like the big showy moments, there's like, and because it's like a movie series, right? Like I feel like if this was a TV series, you could have like a couple of like monster of the week, for lack of a better term, episodes in the middle where you could have the Avengers being Avengers and it's fine.
Yeah. No, I actually think that that's a really core piece of the puzzle, to be honest with you, right? Like the way that these crossover events work in the comics is they are big momentous like things, right? But then there's always all this connective tissue because people have their own series, right? Like there might be a big Avengers crossover book, Infinity War, right? Sort of thing. But like the Iron Man book is still going at the time that the event, like the big event happens, and it is that glue between the one event and the other, right? So Civil War happens here, Secret Invasion happens here, and we have all this glue in between. The Marvel movies don't really have the glue. They just kind of go from event to event, and they imply the glue. And I've been talking about how I like the implication of the glue, essentially, right? Like, in Ultron, it does feel like this is a group of friends, right? That they have been fighting for the last 2 years as the Avengers, right? Thor and Tony and Cap are friends. But like their friendship really is implied between movies more so than it is established.
Right.
And that also sort of means that like when the team splits apart and shatters the way that it has here, I don't know, it's just frustrating.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, the thing I was thinking of is like to your earlier point about like things that aren't quite believable, right? Like, Tony's upset that he got a kid killed, and so he brings a kid to fight the Avengers in the form of Spider-Man, right? Like that was the thing that stood out to me this time, right? Is that like, because he does get like pushback from that at some point in the series, but like I remembered it being in this movie where someone is being like, you brought a kid to this fight, and not in this movie. It's just like that kind of like stuck out at me, right? Like, and
yeah, I've talked about this before. This reminds me a lot of The Force Awakens in its in the way it happened, which is that like this wasn't really a thing I noticed in the theater, right? And at the time I thought it was fine, but now that it's been a couple of years and I have like more context and I'm viewing it and just sort of like not surrounded by all of the hype of its release, it is much worse. Like that moment didn't really stick out to me. I think I did mention it on the podcast, but I was just like, whatever, who cares, right? But like now it is very out of place. It's not actually just out of place. Something that I wrote in my notes is I said the movie feels fundamentally hollow, like too much of it was written and filmed for the theater and not enough of it was filmed for kind of like repeat viewings. And I think that's exactly this effect, right? The thing where Spider-Man shows up, when it plays on my, computer screen or whatever, it just feels so weird and alien because it's this obvious applause moment, right?
Yeah.
And I remember being in the theater where the theater went crazy, and that was a great moment for the theater. But now it's just really awkward and out of place, and
Yeah.
it kind of like crumbles the whole storyline with it in a way of like
Uh,
Tony recruiting Spider-Man.
yeah, this is an interesting and weird thing because like, this is very much kind of like a nature of repeated viewings and how much do we care about that? Like you can never go back and see any twist with fresh eyes again, right? Like
Yeah,
and this isn't exactly a twist, but it's in that kind of category of things that only like work to their full effect on the first viewing, or at least in that way on the first viewing, and like I think I agree with you, right? Like twists, I think make sense because it's like an interesting storytelling thing. This is just clearly for like like the and I clapped because I saw it type of thing. Like it's Spider-Man, right?
yeah.
Um, but otherwise, I was kind of struck by like how like this movie it feels sad, right? Like, and I think that's maybe the point, right? Like, like the final fight between Cap and Tony and Bucky is just kind of like it feels bad, but like I think that's maybe what they were going for. So like it's I guess it makes sense. I don't know. How do you feel about the villain? Because I'm not sure how I feel about him.
I think Strucker is the almost the quintessential Marvel villain who is more plot device than character. All the character that he gets is established in a handful of lines. I think his plan makes no sense, but that kind of doesn't matter to me. This falls in the. I remember these two things happening back to back, obviously, because the movies came out. But this reminds me a lot of Lex Luthor and Batman vs Superman, where if you actually lay out his plan kind of moment for moment, it just makes no sense, like no logical sense, right? But I don't think it really matters that much because
Yeah.
really the core of the movie is like he's sort of just this plot device hanging off the side of it, doing stuff to sort of like push the story forward, and that's kind of like fine. The he doesn't really need to necessarily be more than that, I guess is my thing.
Yeah, I think I
So
agree with
I
that.
think the fake out is worse than I remembered it being. I think so. I think Marvel does really well with these plot twists. I've talked about like the Marvel plot twist thing before, and the plot twist in this one was that like that final fight wasn't about it, like the final thing wasn't about him releasing all of these extra whatever Winter Soldiers, right? The final thing was about him
Turning the
getting
Avengers against
Tony
each other.
and
Yeah.
Cap to fight each other, right? And it's just like that. All of that, none of that piece of it makes sense. But the emotional moment still kind of hits.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I also don't quite remember. Like, it feels like it just kind of resolves and it's not too much of a problem. Moving forward, maybe
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
think that's another piece of it. Absolutely.
and that's a forward looking problem, right? Like this is one of those things where like we've talked about like like how like viewing the series as a whole can change the movie, right? Like I think like we've talked about this with the prequels, right? Like I think that like
Mm,
the later prequels make the earlier prequels better in some senses. Um
yeah.
and I think in this case, I think that the later like the like this is a potentially nice setup point that I don't think gets paid off very well on.
Yeah, I think this is another piece that's like disappointing. I feel like I'm optimistic about this kind of things in movies, right? Like I always want to give the movie kind of a future benefit of the doubt, right?
Right.
Something happens and it's cool and it kind of sets up future stuff and I'm like, "Oh, that's sweet. I hope that kind of pays off." It doesn't really
Yeah.
pay off. There's like some lip service paid to it in Infinity War and it's sort of like a thing, but like Infinity War is itself such a giant roller, just like from minute one, Infinity War is like barreling at top speed. So there's just no time for any of these kinds of moments, which is something to Civil War's credit, right? Like Civil War gives a lot of time for these characters to kind of like sit and talk through their perspectives and sort of like those philosophies and stuff like that. And like I said, like that is the stuff that's best. When I didn't realize how good that conversation between Tony and Cap was until I saw it again. This is one of the only places in the movie where I was like, oh, this is better than I remember. Because like you don't quite realize how close Tony gets to convincing Cap, and then he kind of like overplays his hand. Because then he says, we're going to get you and Wanda reinstated. And Cap's like, well, what does Wanda have to do with it? Right? Like as soon as and that's like the tension that works and that really kind of like sells all of it, but it goes nowhere, right? Like in Civil War, none of that stuff pays off as far as I'm concerned. It's kind of a I don't know, a letdown, I guess.
Yeah. So you had mentioned on the previous episode, I think, that you thought that the airport fight was kind of like drab or whatever. I still thought it was fun. Probably because I like Ant-Man too much, but you know, I still enjoyed the airport fight scene.
It is drab. I don't like the airport fight really. It is the color palette that does it for me, and a little bit of the camera work. Where you know it is just it's very like super bright and lots of like gray and very kind of like muddy. It does do some cool stuff, right? Like I think the kind of the giant man moment is okay. Falcon, I wrote in my notes that Falcon gets a real cool glow up. Like he does a lot of cool shit in the movie, which is sweet. Yeah. I also think Hawkeye does a lot of cool shit in the movie. All that stuff is cool. All that stuff is there. But the real thing about the airport fight that kills me is there is no real consequence.
Right. Because I remember that we talked about this because Rhodey doesn't end up
because Rhodey doesn't fucking die. He just like walks away, and the process of Rhodey getting hurt is much worse, right? Because it's like this contrived accident where like Vision misses or whatever. If it was, I just wish it was more substantial than that. But you know,
yeah.
I don't know. There's a saying. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say I think it could have even worked if Rhodey was like permanently crippled, right? Like. Yeah. And like maybe like needs the War Machine to like walk around or something. Like you could even do like a whole plot with that or whatever. But like, you know, by like even towards the end of this movie, he's already partially fine, which is like I think, you know, a little.
And then and he's cracking jokes about it, right? And he's like doing this whole Tony Stank business, which is like quintessential Marvel movie humor, right? Ruining the drama of the moment in order to get in like a cheap laugh.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that's my thing with the airport fight. If the airport fight had some real kind of, you know, I don't know, consequences, people were getting really hurt. Like I believed that they were trying to kill one another, you know, or like really hurt one another. Whereas this is almost kind of like a, I don't know, just like everybody there's just, it just doesn't feel like there are any stakes to it. Nobody's heart is in it. And it never gets more dramatic than it is. So,
or even if they had paid it off forward, right? Like I could buy that. Like they weren't trying to hurt, like they were trying to like take each other down without really hurting each other. But like this is like the thing that really drives that wedge. And like we said, it doesn't really pay off.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's there in the other pieces of the movie. It's absolutely there in the Tony. You know, in the Tony and Cap fight at the very end, which I think is good, right? Like, it's there in the moment where Wanda does the thing to Vision that he, like, plummets through the earth because she increases his density or whatever. Like, that moment legitimately works because you get the sense that she is agonizing over hurting one of her friends, but she has to do it because of, you know, how this is all playing out or whatever. So it's like they're in these other pieces of the movie, but just the airport fight scene, I just don't feel like anyone is really in danger, and then the movie tries to pretend that Rhodey is in danger and he's not. And it's just like, God, what a mess. I feel like it's because nobody wanted to die. I think they just should have killed someone and been like, you know what, Jeremy Renner, you are not allowed to come back for these free fucking checks anymore. Okay, Hawkeye's dead. Deal with it. You know?
Yeah. That, or I mean, like I said, I think if you had like Rhodey in a wheelchair forever when he's not in the suit, I think that could have worked, right? Like,
yeah, or even that he can't be a superhero anymore, or something. You know what I mean? Like whatever that looks like, right? Yeah. You know, I just want some real tangible consequence to happen.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that's about it for Civil War. Let's move.
Yeah, so that's Civil War, which I had initially rated 2 stars. It is now down to 1 star. Really dislike that movie now.
I've still got it in like the middle of the pack. But we'll go over that at the end. Let's do Doctor Strange, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doctor Strange is a movie I historically love. 5-star was my favorite Marvel movie. For a while, definitely. Like for a long time it was Ultron, and then Doctor Strange came out, and I was like, I just love this. This is so quintessentially Doctor Strange. I just love absolutely every minute of it. Which more or less held up, but like it held up in a different way. I don't go back, like I don't really I've watched Doctor Strange a handful of times after it came out, but I don't really like go back to it. I don't really think about it in the same way that I have sort of these touchstone movies, right? Like I will go to movies I know super well, like Kung Fu Panda or Man of Steel or whatever. Like these movies I've watched like a gazillion times. Ultron is one of these movies, right? I mention this all the time. Doctor Strange is a movie I love that is not one of those movies, because like at the end of the day, it's fairly disposable, but it's just a really great ride. And
Yeah.
I think if I, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have a lot to offer. It doesn't have an insane amount, going on underneath the surface, but it's just like a good, great, solid story that I just love every minute of it. It has a real heart to it that I think a lot of these other Marvel movies are really lacking. And it nails that character so well. I love Doctor Strange. The nice thing is that because I hadn't seen it in so long, it was really great going back to it, which I think is kind of the category, right? If I watched this movie all the time, I would probably be watching it again and being like, well, I've seen all this already. But because it's been 3 years or whatever, I was just like, boy, this movie's fucking great.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you like 90% of the way. The thing that stuck out at me this time is that like, he feels in a lot of ways like Tony Stark too.
Mm.
And that like I think played a little bit negatively, right? Like he's a little too similar and kind of like, and maybe this is just because they've been watching him, them all so close back to back, but like, arrogant, smart guy who then gets superpowers. And like kind of even though like, Tony builds a suit and, Doctor Strange learns how to be like, a magician, they still kind of like approach those problems in this, like they rely on kind of like their, feels like they kind of like rely on their intelligence to do it,
Yeah.
right? Like Doctor Strange.
Yeah, like I definitely have. Well, continue. Actually,
I was just gonna say Doctor Strange is good at sorcery because he's got like really good memory and he like reads a lot of books. Really, that's all. Really.
Yeah, I like the interaction between Doctor Strange and Iron Man, and I think this is sort of why people forget Doctor Strange in a way, because a lot of people have connected to Tony, right? And I famously, I never really did, and that is, I think, why this movie works for me so well, because it does a lot of the things that I wish happened in Iron Man movies. Like, so for instance, Doctor Strange is pretty appropriately punished for his arrogance in the script of this movie in a way that I wish Tony was punished for his arrogance in the Iron Man movies, right? Like, I talk about in Iron Man 3 how he just feels like this fucking jackass, and I just want to smack him, but like everyone is like, oh, Tony's so kooky and funny and relatable, and just because he's mean to me while he's funny, that makes it fine or whatever. Well, like, Doctor Strange is just like biting and mean, and he faces a real comeuppance for it that feels just so much more satisfying, right? Like there's a whole thing that I really appreciate, which I didn't notice before, but like I really paid attention to this time. He has that conversation with Pangborn, the guy who was paralyzed, who used magic to make himself play basketball or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The way that scene plays out is actually really insightful to the character dynamic, right? Where Doctor Strange, he's super down, and he goes and he says, "How did you do it?" And Pangborn says, "Well, I did it, but you were a huge ass to me, so I'm just going to go back to play basketball." And then Doctor Strange says, then he kind of confesses. He has this moment of vulnerability where he's like, "I can't." Right. And I am losing and I really need the help. And it's that moment of honesty and that moment of vulnerability where he puts his ego aside and he puts that arrogance aside, that Pangborn turns around and he's like, okay, I will give you the help that you deserve. Right. Which is exactly what this is. It is like that. We're exactly what I want to see. It's that like the arrogance is then sort of dismantled over time. And as he dismantles it, he is then rewarded with the good stuff that like comes later. Like one of the details that I think is really great is that it's not a test for him to join the to get training at the school or whatever. Like a lot of time you'll do that thing where they're like, "Oh, do you want to learn more?" And he's like, "Yes." And they're like, "Sorry, leave." But like really leaving is a test and you have to prove your dedication by like staying outside the door. Well, they actually have this scene in Doctor Strange where the Ancient One is like, actually, I don't want to train him and I don't think he's worth it. And Baron Mordo goes out on a limb for him and says, "You know what, I think you should like reconsider." So it's like, it's not a test. He legitimately shows the dedication and is able to turn their, like,
Yeah.
he's able to like turn them around on that. And I think those sorts of details are just like so great and so good and just like, what a solid movie. It's nothing. It's kind of like Aquaman. It's like nothing amazingly new. It's not breaking down any barriers. It's a story we've seen a million times, but it's just a good story told well.
Yeah, and so I think the thing that really stood out to me again this time around is the visuals, right? Like the
Yeah.
mind bending stuff. Like, I thought that was like great. Like I don't think it was anything like super insano, right? Like it felt like like maybe Inception on steroids, I guess, but it was still fun, right? And like still like it was used cleverly, right? Like the thing where like he like punts the one woman through the door and then changes it so she can't come back through. I thought that was clever.
Yeah.
Um,
I think all that stuff is just honestly super good. It is like inventive and I guess just clever. It's like the good, like a good word for it. Where it's just like at any individual moment, I kept being like, "Oh, that's neat. Oh, that's cool." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the action just built well. Which I've been very critical about the action in these Marvel movies, but I love all of the action in Doctor Strange. Not because it's filmed well, which is typically my thing. I don't like the way that a lot of these are shot, but just because it's just cool, right? It's just clever. They really thought it through and they made neat stuff happen, right? Like they're in the mirror dimension and the Ancient One makes the lotus makes the lotus petal, but it's out of subway tiles from New York City or whatever. Like just like it's just neat little details like that, just so cool.
Absolutely.
Also, the Ancient One dies. Huge improvement on like every fucking Marvel movie. There are real consequences. Somebody fucking fucks up and they die for it. And it's just like, it's because I watched it right next to Civil War that this is the thing that I wrote down. But I was just like, the Ancient One's death. I said, God, the Ancient One deaths is so good. It's the perfect stakes racing consequence that Civil War pussyfooted around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing that stuck out at me is like, and they try and do their best to be like, and the time stuff is dangerous, so we can't do the time stuff so much, to kind of like get away from what is obviously a problem in the future, right? Like, well, the world's gonna end if we don't do the time stuff, so you can do the time stuff now, right? Like, and I think that mostly works, but still kind of like, like that'll forever be a kind of like, why doesn't Doctor Strange show up and solve this with the Eye of Agamotto? Type of deal. But I think that's like more just kind of like a
yeah. I mean, even just having the fight scene in the reversing time Hong Kong, that was the great. I mean, it's just so
fun.
Cool, right?
It was super fun.
Like throwing the guy in the thing as the bricks are like coming back in from the demolished building. Just like, I don't know. It's just stuff like that's good. I do have a bunch of problems with this movie, or not a bunch, but I have some problems with the movie. This has some of, if not the worst Marvel humor in there. Like agree. I had completely forgotten all of this, right? Where there's that whole bit with it's like, "And who are you, Mr.?" And he's like, "Well, actually it's Doctor." And he's like, "Okay, it's Mr. Doctor." And I'm just like, fuck off. I hate this. I hate every second of this.
Like I want to like Wang, but I think like 90% of the stuff he does just falls flat. Like like Beyonce, it's like that was like whatever. Then like the thing he like like he doesn't laugh at anything, and then he laughs at some jokes. Like that fell super flat to me, right? Like
it reminds me of you remember how you really complained about the "what are those" moment in Black Panther?
Yeah.
It is that version. It's like that cringe almost, but in this movie. Oh yeah, I hated all that stuff. I also think that Caecilius sucks and is maybe one of the worst Marvel villains out there. Like ultimately, I don't think it harms the movie that much, because again, Marvel movie villains are mostly plot devices. But they, I just sort of wish they didn't spend time on him. Like if he was just, I talk about this all the time, right? Like sometimes you can just have a villain that has some weird goal. You don't have to give them a motivation. You just want to fucking whatever. Dormammu says, I'm gonna take over the earth, so I'm doing all this crazy shit. Here are my cultists, right? But they do all this stuff with like death, and it's like, oh, death is the ultimate. No, no, here's my crazy whack job philosophy or whatever. I'm just like, cut this, get rid of this. Nobody cares, right? Just have him make his like reality knives and throw them at Doctor Strange. You could just say Dormammu promised that I would rule the world if I did this thing. I would be fine. Like it's like Loki in the Avengers. It's like Ultron. They just like and they're just not. It's not compelling. It's confusing. It's uninteresting. Just get rid of this stuff. Just have the bad guys be bad, please.
So I disagree with you a little bit, just because I think the issues on the other end, where like, it's, it's like, and the Ancient One uses a dark dimension and she's lying to you, right? And like Doctor Strange is like, wait a minute, that's true, and he brings it up, and then is immediately like just like turns back over, and it's like, oh, that was fine then, that's okay. But then that like causes Barter to go off the deep end, right? Like, which just like feels like you need at least a little bit there for like that to make sense in kind of like the, you need at least like.
And it's crazy to me that it's not Baron Mordo who calls her on this, right? Like, it just seems to me like the obvious thing you do is you have Doctor Strange tell Mordo, and Mordo is the one that freaks out. But in that moment, it is Doctor Strange who's like, well, actually, the Ancient One, you're using the Dark Dimension, and that's bad. And it's just like, if this is Mordo's thing, just give it to him, and we don't have to deal with this like weird, because it is so weird that Steven just immediately after is like, oh, actually, this is fine. Not a big deal. Not a big deal at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of interrupted by that action scene, but just philosophically, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think if I were to redo it, I think, like when he undoes the damage to the book, like he realizes it, and then Bardo sees it, and he realizes it, and then like he brings it up later or something, and then you kind of like Steven understands, right? Like, or like at some point, like because even I think like as a character, it makes sense that he's like, well, you do what you have to do sometimes, right? Like I think that makes sense for his character, right? Like, I think like, and I'm interested to see like Bardo in the future. I think Bardo will be an interesting villain in the future, right? Because like he's like very Rorschach, right? Like
Yeah.
And so I think whenever Mountains of Mysteries or whatever that the thing is, if it deals with him, I think that'll be interesting. No, I just don't think it's handled well, but I think that's ultimately a minor point, right?
Yeah, all this stuff is honestly pretty minor. I also have a couple of problems with. I think the movie. I don't think the hospital stuff works in the moment. In like the fight scene, for instance, like this actual projection fight scene is cool, and I like the thing about them trying to save the Ancient One's life, and she slows down time, and they have that astral projection conversation. I think that part is great, or whatever. So there's like hospital stuff that I enjoy, but ultimately I think this like Rachel McAdams Christine character just like doesn't really work. She pretty immediately falls away. It's not like she came back in any of the other movies. It just feels she feels sort of like vestigial in a way, right? Like we've kind of moved past the point where all of these characters need their girlfriends to be in the movie. Like you can just have a superhero movie where there's no love interest. That's fine. We're fine with that, right? And so her character and some of this like ancillary hospital shit, I'm just kind of like, nah, I could live without it.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like his like just to show him arcing, right? Like he like his arrogance bringing back, but like like again, she is like Pepper Potts in that like she's around when the plot needs her to be, and then like is like off screen written out of the movies when it's inconvenient to bring her in, right?
Oh
like
and then she comes back in the next movie completely reconciled, having her banter with whatever because it's just the needs of the movie or whatever. I hate that shit. Yeah, I feel like I would just want to like get rid of this. Like, I don't know. The hospital stuff for Doctor Strange is part of like the pilot episode and is never part of anything else after that. You know what I mean? Like nobody ever goes to Doctor Strange for medical advice in the comics or whatever. So kind of it just sort of like overstays its welcome. If Christine was a character that just only showed up in the first act to tell Doctor Strange he's an asshole and then ignore his emails later, I actually think that would actually kind of be better. Because you know what? Sometimes you don't get closure. You don't get to reconcile with people, and that's okay. That happens. We move on in our lives, and Steven needs to move on from this. I don't know. I just like I feel like that stuff doesn't quite work. Isn't amazing, but That's
I
what it
also
is.
think it's a little bit too crowded, right? Because like I think a big moment for Steven is right. It's like he hands the scalpel off to the other doctor that he was telling off. It's like you need to do this. You need to save the ancient one, and then the ancient one dies, right? Like if you think about that for like a second, it's just kind of like you know, it's it's if I wanted
Yeah,
to view it with
I actually think that the perfect time for like in a certain sense, I think this is why the Stephen is the one to bring the ancient one's transgressions up, so that that conversation they have when she dies is like more impactful, right? Like he is feeling shitty towards her, but in her dying moments she is able to convince Steven that actually she did the best she could, and that's okay or whatever. I think that's the moment they're really kind of going for, but it doesn't quite work because it's not set up well, and I think it's because it's all moving too fast. There's too much going on.
yeah. I think it's actually a good transition point to jump us into Guardians of the Galaxy 2 because I think that's like the chief flaw with Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Uh,
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I still enjoy this movie. This movie of these three movies falls in the middle for me on the scale. It also falls in kind of like the upper middle quadrant for me on the total rankings. And that's my initial thing. I'll go into the pacing stuff after you give your top line because I want to.
My top line for Guardians of the Galaxy is I remember not liking this movie in the theater, coming around on it later because I had like I watched a couple of like YouTube videos where people kind of like talked about it more, and I saw some of the deeper stuff in it, and I now like it quite a bit. It was 4 stars for me on Letterboxd, and now it might be a 5-star movie. I really like this one, just because like in a certain sense, my eyes have been opened to all of the good stuff, and there is a lot of it here. Probably this is the most thematically and kind of emotionally complex Marvel movie that we've gotten, just because there's a lot of characters with a lot of stuff going on who are going through a lot of different kind of like arcs. And I appreciate that. Like that's the stuff that I always talk about wanting, right? This is kind of like the ambition that I respond to in movies. So like I don't know. Now that I've kind of been primed to see it in the right way, I really had a great time with this one. Though some of the action sucks. So is what it is. Specifically, the final fight. I do not think the final fight is great, even though it apes the shit out of Man of Steel, which big rip.
To your point, I think there is a lot going on in this movie, but I think some of that's to its detriment. Like,
Mhm.
like in particular, the thing in particular that hits me are the relationships with Yandu, which feel like they are rushed in and out the door because he has to build up these relationships. It's like the one that makes that really like I think works the worst is the one with Raccoon, with Rocket,
Really, I
because
love
like
that stuff. I don't know.
so
Yeah.
so
Okay.
I think like it works on a thematic level, but it happens so fast that I don't believe it. Right? It's like 15 minutes, right? Like in terms of like even like in universe time, right? Like he gives him the speech on the ship and then he dies and Rocket's like, wow, my the person that the person that understood me. I was like I don't believe that you like really bought that. Like I think honestly, I think that there should have been a middle movie where like get like more flashbacks to Yandu and young Chris Pratt and like a little bit more time for um uh what's for Rocket and Yandu to grow closer. Like you could just do like the gold people plot because like ultimately they don't really matter, right? Like
Yeah, see, I think they are the ones that don't fit in this movie, and I think that there is some detritus in there that I don't love. Like, I think that they're all ultimately like okay, but if anybody kind of sticks out in this movie like a Thor thumb, like a sore thumb, it is the Sovereign.
yeah. I think I agree, but that's why I kind of want to I ideally want to split this, right? Like you give a little bit of time to like develop the problems, right? Like I like we get like this Ravagers like I think the Ravager stuff works well enough. I think that you can do this in this. I think they do that fine, but I think it could have benefited a little bit from having like a little bit of build up. You find out that like Yandu's disgraced in this theoretical second movie, and you resolve it in the third, right? Like um that's at least the way I would have played it, and I think that like just the speed is real detriment to
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I get that. In a certain sense, this is the perfect. I think I actually completely agree with this criticism, but this is the exact type of thing that I happily forgive. In like this is perfectly suited towards my taste. I am more than happy to have more. I would rather have more than less, And so when these kinds of films are a little overstuffed, I'm just like, that's fine. Like it doesn't bother me on a taste level, right? Even if on a quality level, I probably agree. And there is some stuff that I like, like there's some like real damage it does. Like, so for instance, Drax and Mantis, like I like their interactions, and I think that their interactions are like meaningful. And this is one of the things that really sells the movie to me. Every interaction is like meaningful in like a character way or like a thematic way. Whereas like in Doctor Strange, for instance, the Mr. Doctor shit is definitely not meaningful. It's just
Right.
there to tell a joke, right? Or there's that bit with the cloak of levitation where he wants to run one way, but the cloak is pulling him back the other way or whatever. It's like it is just like 30 seconds of dead time or whatever.
Yeah,
But
it needs to be like shorter.
Yeah, what Guardians does that's really clever is like all of the jokes and all of the humor is like also referencing, like real character moments, right? Or like they have some meaning in the, like in kind of this greater thematic web that's being drawn. Like, Quill and Rocket going back and forth on who's piloting or whatever, like that is funny. Is when Quill goes like lucky for us, and then Rocket goes like I am, but it derives from this core sort of like tension between the two of them, and like that overcompensating nature of Rocket that then comes out later, where he's like stealing batteries he doesn't need because he's like driving people away and all this stuff. And so like it's that stuff that I really, really, really love in this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think, like I said, I do enjoy the movie. Yep. I think that's fine.
I also think Ego is really great. Ego might be the first truly good Marvel movie villain, like that I would think of as he's just incredibly compelling, very dangerous. The stakes are obvious. He has a deep and complex relationship with the characters of the movie, multiple of them, but obviously mostly Peter, right? And he does the thing where he like explains his plot and his motivation and why he's doing what he's doing in a way that just so many of these other villains like have been whiffing on, like Caecilius and Loki and whoever else, that it just feels, I don't know, he's the whole package.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's actually kind of, I think really like the, I think that shines really well is the thing that he does that fucks up isn't explaining his like master terrible plan. It's admitting that he killed Peter's mother, right? Which I think is good for like Peter's characterization, right?
Yeah, I actually really hated that moment at the time because I remember feeling it was incredibly. It's wild to me how differently that moment hit, because I guess at the time it just felt kind of almost out of nowhere because I just wasn't clicking with the movie. But now that I'm sort of I see it better, that moment just works so well because it is true, right? Like this is a guy who it doesn't. I don't know. I think at the time it just felt sort of like random and out of place, but now it just feels perfectly in line with his character and exactly the kind of mistake that a super egotistical villain would make, right? Like he just literally doesn't care about these people, and so he off the cuff references how he murdered one of them in order to attain his thing because he just doesn't he's incapable of the empathy to understand how much that matters to Peter. It's like, I don't know, that just felt so right in line with everything we had seen, where before it really stuck out as a sore thumb for me. Man, I need to stop making that euphemism.
I think the other part of that too is that it's particularized to Peter in a perfect way, right?
Mm.
Because like I remember being kind of like on like the plot point in Infinity War, but like this happened. I forget exactly, but it happened in the first movie, happened in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and so it makes it really makes sense. They do the work to make it make sense for him in Infinity War that like he is very emotional and like he will lose his temper and it will cause problems. But I think that like they do the work to justify it, and it makes perfect sense.
I actually think the moment where he just pulls out his guns and shoots is one of the greatest. It's like a Han shot first kind of thing. Because like
or Indiana,
yeah. Like somebody once described the Guardians of the Galaxy as actually a villain movie, which I don't agree with. But like you kind of get it. Like in a certain sense, they're always bickering, they're always fighting. They are kind of naturally pretty mean, and also pretty mercenary about their like
And
work. They're
shitty.
not like
Yeah.
typically, like selfless in the way that sort of superheroes are. And this is the perfect thing that goes along with that. You know what I mean? Whereas I don't think Captain America would immediately pull out his guns and start shooting. It 100% makes sense and is perfectly in line. And I think just like, I don't know, a cool moment that
Yeah.
Star-Lord does that exact same thing.
They're anti-heroes, but without like being edgy, which is not a combination you see often in
Yeah.
media. Um,
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to put it.
um, but what was it? So something I think I liked the first time. I remember liking the first time around, but I absolutely despised this time was the he might have been your father, but he's not your daddy. Thought that would have been a lot better if it was just left unsaid, right? Like, because that's like it's like they're like, ah, yes, this theme is coming through crystal clear, and then they smack you on the nose with it because in case you didn't.
The problem with me for that line is that in the last like 2 years, the term "daddy" has become very loaded. People make jokes about like Elon Musk is cave daddy or whatever. Like Peterson, it's like these daddies. I don't know. It's like entered the Twitter like lexicon, so I can't hear that. Like this line predates all of that stuff, but I just can't hear it outside of that context. So it's just like, oh, Peter has a fucked up relationship with Yondu, apparently. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Like that, and the there's only I only have one breather and one jetpack thing, right? Like, like that makes sense, but it also felt like they pulled it out a little too late. Like I feel like if they had, a couple minutes, a couple like maybe like 15 minutes earlier, be like, Rocket's like checking something, and it's like, oh, I only have one left, whatever. Like that would have, but if I think it felt cheap, the way it kind of just like happened at the end. It's like, now we will force the problem.
Yeah, I also this is part of my criticism of the end. I think that action scene at the end is just too complicated, which is funny because this is something I praised about the original Guardians, right? Where like I liked that all of the action scenes had all of these component parts, and it was very trackable, right? Where what was going where, what was happening, like the prison break or whatever, where you could kind of see they were breaking the team apart and they were all accomplishing their individual objectives and kind of coming together a little bit later down the line. This action scene also does that same thing. But I think it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's just like overly complicated. There's so much going on. It's kind of hard to track, who is where and doing what on the planet, kind of like in a geographical sort of sense, which is sort of where I think like that bit sort of kind of falls apart for me. And I just sort of wish Yondu had a more straightforward sort of sacrifice than this whole thing with the rebreather or whatever. Just shoot the guy and have him bleed out in your arms. Like classic shit works, man.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with you on that. Yeah. I don't know if I've got a lot more.
I don't really have any more like complicated thoughts to put in there, though. I am kind of dreading the next slate of movies just because I kind of forgot how I really didn't love the Guardians of the Galaxy the way that I do now. The Guardians of the Galaxy have gotten a bigger boost from this rewatch. And I think that's going to make some of like the later stuff hurt a little bit more.
Yeah, no, so what's up next on the docket?
That's a good question. Let me take a quick
look. So it's Spider-Man: Homecoming, Thor: Ragnarok, and Black Panther, which not a bad set. Yeah, that'll be fun.
That is a very interesting set. I have not seen. I've seen Spider-Man: Homecoming is not one that I have revisited often. But Thor: Ragnarok and Black Panther I've seen a couple times. Black Panther might be the Marvel. Nah, that's not true. Ultron is probably the one I've watched the most. But I've watched Black Panther a bunch of times, on like Disney Plus or whatever.
So we've got those. So with this that one, and then it's Infinity War, Wasp, Marvel, and then Endgame and Far From Home. So we have to do 3. We have to do 4 of these for Phase 3. Why did Phase 3 have so many more movies than the other one?
I think it's because the 2 Spider-Man movies got put in. So if you pull out Spider-Man, well, it's also a little bit weird that Infinity War doesn't end Phase 3, which it feels like it should to me.
Yeah.
For instance, it's sort of, I don't know, I don't know. we'll talk about it, I guess. How was your week? Tell me all about your life.
I mean, well, first let's do our final rankings, and then you can tell
Oh
me about
yes, let's do
Shadowlands
that.
because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah, yeah.
Shadowlands is you're gonna want to talk for half an hour about Shadowlands.
This is what I'm super excited about talking about. That's true.
All right, so what is so I'll
Okay,
go.
so
Yeah, go for it.
my top has been Age of Ultron this whole time, and that remains. I actually do think, which is a little bit different than I would have guessed. Because like I said, I thought Doctor Strange was my favorite after, but Age of Ultron just has more stuff going on. It's sort of like stood the test of time a little bit better, and because of that, Doctor Strange hits in that number 2 spot. So it's Avengers, Age of Ultron, Doctor Strange, and then Avengers 1 from 2012. Then Guardians of the Galaxy 2, also very good, comes in just below Avengers 1, which is mostly just because of some of this stuff with, which is just like mostly because some of this stuff with the end still bothered me. And then I don't know, there's just something magical about like the Avengers where it has really kind of like risen, and I keep putting stuff up against it, and I'm like, do I really like Guardians of the Galaxy better than the Avengers? It's like, man, kind of no. Fuck, no, I don't. And then way down at the bottom of the list, we got Captain America Civil War, which is my second least favorite. The first Captain America is still worse, and I still hate it more. But Civil War is also in that 1-star territory. So my full list goes Ultron, Doctor Strange, The Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, The Winter Soldier, Iron Man 2, the first Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor 2, Hulk, Thor, Iron Man 3, Ant-Man, Iron Man, Captain America Civil War, Captain America.
All right, so for my part, Strange and Guardians of the Galaxy go towards the top, and Civil War goes like at the bottom of the good movies and the top of the bad movies. It's like right on that border. So
Okay.
so top to bottom, it's Ant Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Winter Soldier, Iron Man 1, Ultron, Avengers, Thor 2, still tied with Avengers. I think I'm going to solidify that as tied. Um, uh, Captain America, the First Avenger, Civil War, Iron Man 2, Thor 1, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 3 at the bottom where it belongs.
Iron Man 3 is getting a fucking beating. Yeah. Wow. What a. This is actually interesting because I felt like at first our lists were pretty similar, but now they have diverged very harshly. Like they are very different lists at this point.
So there are weird swap points, but like we both put Strange and Guardians of the Galaxy pretty high up towards the top, right? Like
That's true. Yeah.
I wonder, like, I feel like we'll do this at the end, but I feel like on the movies where we're similar on, there's not going to be that much difference, but on the movies where we differ, they're going to be very different.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
But tell me about Shadowlands.
Okay, so I told the story to Mango off the cast, but last night was Tuesday, which was officially a week, right? Shadowlands launched essentially on midnight, but like kind of into Monday, technically speaking. It was a week of Shadowlands being out, and we all did /played, which is the command that you can use in game to see how long you have been playing your character, right? Your overall time for this entire character's lifetime, and also your time at whatever level you're at. So I leveled Bairn, my main, to 60 in the first 2 days because I took that whole week off from work, and I was just playing Shadowlands. Rachel and I were playing together. She was playing Orahe, her main. I was playing Bairn, my main, and we got to max level at the end of the second day, which meant that I had about 5 days of being 5.5, like 6 days of being max level, and my time played at the time was 13 hours, or 3 days and 13 hours, which is about half my time waking. More than that, actually. About 60% of the time I was awake, I was playing World of Warcraft. Which is great because I have been missing this feeling. I've just been like so hyped for Shadowlands and just really in a WoW spot for so long, but there was nothing to do. I had already done all the cool stuff in 8.3. I had gotten my achievement for the Keystone dungeons. We had gotten ahead of the curve, like defeating N'Zoth. And I had all these characters at max level. They all had gear rankings. I was getting like these, like the achievements for putting the time in or whatever. And then I was sort of like left with like 3 months of just like, well, there's no use doing anything. I just can't get rewards really from doing anything. And so it's just so nice to hit an expansion, and now I'm getting like upgrades, and we're running dungeons, and I'm looking at it, it's like, ooh, this is a great item for me, or whatever. Like, it's just been so long since I've had that feeling. Because for the longest time, it was just like, like I'd get an upgrade like once a week, maybe at max, right? If my like Mythic Plus chest rolled well or whatever. And so that just like feels great. That just like is such a cool sort of like feeling to have again. And yeah, Shadowland systems are neat. They're very different than the Battle for Azeroth systems, but in like a way that feels sort of weirdly gratifying. I'm actually a little down compared to the way a lot of people are, just because they really loved like that, like some of these changes. But like, so for instance, okay, so one of the things that bothers me a little about Shadowlands compared to Battle for Azeroth is that like there is no infinite grind, which I know sounds crazy and stupid, but hear me out. If you like playing the game, like if you like doing stuff in the game, it's nice to always have like value to be gotten even at very low rates out of the stuff that you do, if that makes sense, right? So for instance, for me, it's Torghast. Torghast, which is this it's this like instanced mode, but you can do it solo, you can do it in 2 people, 3 people, in all different combinations. You could do 5 healers if you wanted, you could do tanks or whatever. And the whole gimmick behind Torghast is it's a roguelike, right? So as you are progressing through the dungeon, you're getting these powers that are dramatically altering the way your character works and is built. So for Warrior, it might increase the duration of Blade Storm by 40%. It might reduce the cooldown of Mortal Strike, and you can stack these powers, right? Like I had a run where I reduced the cooldown of Mortal Strike so many times that I just didn't have a cooldown, and I was just running around. The only thing I was just hitting with my most powerful ability over and over and over again. I had a run where I was my whole thing was I had a whole bunch of defensive powers, and I just didn't die because my main defensive, its duration was increased and its cooldown was decreased, such that I could just always have it up, and I'm just always parrying, and nobody could ever melee me ever again. And stuff like that just like feels sweet. But the thing is that Torghast only has weekly rewards, right? So when you play Torghast, when you walk in, you get that max level reward. If you complete the floor 3 of wing whatever, you get the dust, which is very valuable. It's the stuff you use to craft legendary items, but then you just can't do anything more. And I want to play more Torghast, but there's just like nothing you get out of it, I guess, besides like loot, like gold, right? Like vendor trash or whatever. So that's sort of the world that we live in. Not all pieces of Torghast are open, and they have promised that there is a mode for people like me who just they just like the roguelike stuff and they want to do more of it. So it's not all open because the raid isn't open, Mythic Plus isn't open. Torghast caps at the 3rd. They call them layers, right? They caps at the 3rd layer, but the layers go all the way up to 8. The next 3 layers up to 6 open with the raid, which opens next week, and then the final 2 layers open with the Mythic raid, which opens the week after that. So, hypothetically speaking, I will report back and say, oh, it's super fun to play Torghast because I can just grind Twisting Corridors this whole time. And then, but the other thing that they have done is they have sort of changed some of the systems to be very focused on like the big gameplay mechanic, which is covenants, right? You have the 4 different factions and you sort of pledge your loyalty to one of them. But a lot of your power comes out of that choice and that faction, right? And you are, instead of like grinding for artifact power levels or whatever, like you did in Legion, like you did in Battle for Azeroth, you are now grinding for renown. But it's not even really a grind. It's just like a weekly quest, and you can increase your renown by 2 or 3 a week. And so, you just put in a certain amount of the time. I did all of mine yesterday on reset day, and there's just no more power for myself to unlock until next week's quest unlock, which is freeing, I guess. This is the thing that people always talked about, which is that like the ability to endlessly grind those artifact levels sort of created a feeling of like FOMO, right? Where it's like you're not done with your character until you have done this thing. But now I can just log in a day and take care of all of my character's shit, right? all of his weekly whatever, all of his rep, all of his stuff. And if I want to go above and beyond, I can do above and beyond. I can clear all of the world quests. I can do X, Y, and Z sort of thing. But for the most part, the power I'm going to gain each week is pretty easy to attain. So I don't know. That's more or less where I'm at. What do you want to know? Do you have any questions?
The covenants. I know that there has been. We've talked several times about like the potential kind of backlash from the covenants. How is it playing out in reality?
In reality, I don't think it matters so much yet. Because the raid isn't out, which is mostly the way that people adjudicate this stuff. I have not seen a ton of talk about Covenant Balance, but I imagine that I will in a week or two, right? Okay. Once the world first race kicks off, once people are thinking kind of along those sorts of lines, it's likely that people will be having these kinds of conversations. For my part, I have dutifully chosen the worst warrior covenant. Fuck me. However, I have decided to buck the trend, and I have made a build that I think is good, and the theory crafters can go to hell. And it's working out pretty great. It's not the best thing for it's not the best thing for certain types of content, but it will work out sort of like later down the line. Part of it is that like when we were testing this Covenant stuff on the beta, it was just all unlocked, but now it is gated behind that weekly renown. So it is less about like it's kind of like it's like comparing a final build to a mid-game build in like League of Legends or whatever, right? Like, yeah, technically Infinity Edge is better than Phantom Dancer in a final build in a 45-minute game of League or whatever. But actually, maybe Phantom Dancer makes sense in the mid game when you're getting hunted down or whatever you want to use like Phantom Dancer for, sort of thing. Like each of the covenants has their own sort of utility, has their own sort of highs and lows, where certain abilities are sort of shining and other abilities are kind of like falling by the wayside. And I feel like that's pretty natural. So I may have the worst warrior ability in kind of like raw DPS terms, but it's actually changed our gameplay quite a bit because it's a big cooldown. There's a group cooldown, right? Like I plant a war banner and everybody in the or two people in the banner, two of my allies and myself all get plus 10% crit chance. So it's like, well, where am I dropping the war banner for the fights? This is something that like we're not thinking on a kind of strategic level about. Whereas, if I was just going like the blanket, what the recommended covenant, I wouldn't be making those sorts of decisions, or like my group and I would not be making those sorts of decisions together. Also, because Phalanor and I play so much together and he also plays Arms Warrior, it would kind of suck if we both went the same covenant. He went the best covenant, but also sort of for RP reasons, which is Venthyr, which changes your execute to a better version of execute. And it's actually kind of neat that now he and I are playing the same spec of the same class, but we are built pretty differently and we are looking for kind of different stuff. And I don't know, that's just all that seems just like really neat and really cool to me.
That sounds fun. Yeah. What was
also crafting legendaries is nuts and super cool because I talked about this on the cast a little bit a while ago, where it's like a professions thing, where if you have you have to buy the item and then you have to enchant it and then you have to do whatever in order to make it. So it feels like there's a real profession kind of like there's real profession gameplay in a way that I just haven't felt in a long time.
Right. So
for gear.
That's real quick first. How is the ability unsquished treated? Like that was the thing that they like gave everybody a bunch more ability.
Oh yeah. Unpruning. The biggest change for that for me is I had to add a lot more hotkeys. For a long time, I was just going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then Shift 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Alt 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the F keys. So F1 through F6, just because like that's sort of the reachable keys on the keyboard. But now I have all of these new abilities, so I'm now into Alt Q, Alt W, Alt E, Shift Q, Shift W sort of thing, which is honestly pretty funny. But I do like having the extra utility. Like one of the things, in general, I haven't found the unpruning to make any meaningful distinctions, right? Like the 90% of my gameplay is the exact same, right? It's not like they unpruned anything that became a core piece of my rotation. But they did unprune stuff that's just neat and useful. So, for instance, warriors now have challenging shout again, which just taunts everything in an area. So, something that I can do as an arms warrior is I can challenging shout, die by the sword, which increases my parry chance to 100%. So, like, if a tank dies in the dungeon, I can do a challenging shout, die by the sword combo to pull all of the mobs so that when the tank gets battle rezzed, like he can come up and take things. So it's stuff like that. One of the things they unpruned from hunters, for instance, is trank shot, tranquilizing shot, which removes an enrage effect. So there is that extra utility. If you're a hunter, it's like, oh, can you trank off this enrage? It's like, oh yeah, sure, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, cool. Back to the profession stuff. I gotta know, how's fishing?
Fishing apparently is good. I haven't done any of it, but Rachel and Phelanor both did, and they did a bunch of stuff with it. So I don't know. Apparently that's cool. One of the things about the Shadowlands is the 4 different zones are themed very like heavily towards their covenant or whatever. So it is more like clear and obvious how and why you want to go fishing, right? Like you want to go to a zone because the fish are going to be in this, like in this specific zone doing this specific thing. And they're like specific fishing poles or something. I don't really know, but so that I don't think it's anywhere close to Legion, which is probably the most advanced fishing ever got.
Legion's the gold standard.
And there's some stuff in Battle for Azeroth. There is a bunch of fishing achievements that are like cool and give you unique shit, but for the most part, I don't know. Fishing is fishing.
And
I'm told it's fun.
and how's the lore so far?
The lore is good, I would say. There's a lot of neat stuff going on, though so one of the interesting things about Shadowlands is one of the things that you can unlock over time with Renown is access to your Covenant storyline, which is sort of like the Order Hall storylines from Legion, right, or the war campaign from Battle for Azeroth, where you have to like unlock over time all of this stuff. And so these stories have sort of played out in a much different way than they did in BFA. Like one of the nice things about BFA actually that I think was really strong is that both of the zones told an entire story like all packaged into one, right? So you had that big Zandalar Forever sort of finale. You did Vol'dun, you did Nazmir, you did Zuldazar, and you got this thing where you're fighting Mithrax and that big great seal breaks and all this other sort of stuff, and that kind of tells a complete story. So like the questing experience into that tells the complete story of Zandalar, and it kind of takes off from there, but like it is its own sort of thing, if that makes sense. In this, each of the zones have a quest line that you go through, but they all feel like pilot episodes in a way. So for instance, you go through Bastion, which is the very first zone, you uncover this alternate, these dark fallen angels, they're doing bad evil shit, these fallen angels, and then you just kind of move to the next zone. And it's like, well, wait, what about these guys? And it all makes sense. Like it makes sense in context that you move to the next zone or whatever. It's not like that moment is like bad or weird, but you are leaving a lot undone. And the thing is, it's because you're kind of leaving that stuff for the Covenant storyline, so that when you play a Kyrian character and you level their renown up and you unlock the story, you then pick up where you sort of left off. So in a certain sort of sense, each of the zones has like its leveling story and then its max level story, and we've only unlocked 2 chapters of the max level story so far. So I don't know, it's all sort of up in the air. There is a cinematic there's a bunch of cinematics actually that explain kind of what's going on, and there's just like some neat moments. Just like playing through the campaign is pretty compelling. There's like a plot twist that's cool. There's actually a bunch of plot twists that I did not see coming, and I was like, oh, neat sort of thing. But like the ultimate plan of the jailer is still kind of in question. We haven't seen that much with Anduin and Sylvanas. We haven't, sort of gotten a greater picture of who the jailer is and what's going on. Though in a lore sense, there's just like a lot to uncover with that stuff that is like pretty sweet and pretty neat. So I don't know. Yeah, that's where we're at.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions I had off the top of my head.
Fair enough. What have you been playing, my dude?
So I haven't been playing a ton of stuff, but I did over the past week watch a classic trilogy of American cinema, Oceans 11, 12, and 13.
I love those movies.
So it was fun going back and watching them because I hadn't seen them in forever. Um, they're all on Netflix if anybody at home wants to watch them. Um, and like I think 11 and 13 are great. I think 12 has a lot of problems. But
12 has a lot of problems, but it has the single best moment in any of these movies, which is when, yeah, I don't even remember. Danny and Julia Roberts are like talking to the Fox guy, and they're like, "How did you get past like the RNG laser field?" And just like, it goes to the 3-minute sequence of him like breakdancing the place. It's just, I that moment is so good. It comes out of nowhere, and it's just like, oh.
so my personal favorite is the plot point, which is that uh Julia Roberts' character, like a plot point is that Julia Roberts' character looks like Julia Roberts. And they have to deal with like a cameo from Bruce Willis who's like Julia.
Yeah.
Which is like that's actually like a really clever kind of for a plot for a heist movie to like use that that point. I think that's cool.
Especially Julia Roberts playing a bad impression of Julia Roberts, right? Like, there's the point where Don Cheadle is like, she's from Georgia, so like, you got to do the drawl or whatever. And she tries to, and she's really bad at it or whatever. It's just like that, you know, like
Don Cheadle doing a very bad British accent, telling her that she needs to do a good accent.
Yeah, people hate that part of the movie, and I remember it got all this flack at the time, and I do think that that movie is pretty bad, to be honest. But like, it's just fun. I don't know. It's just like dumb, stupid fun. It doesn't make a lick of sense. Just zero sense.
The thing that I think really hurts 12 a lot, and this is what you talk about, like stakes being undercut, right? Is that like it turns out that none of it mattered, that like it was all actually solved like 2 days ago, and they're just doing this so that they can convince the Fox that they're like, which is just like way to like undercut everything that just happened, right? Like,
Yeah. So I love the beginning of 12 also, where Andy Garcia's character, who they robbed in the first movie, just like shows up at their house with a bunch of fucking goons because he's a gangster. And it's like, I sometimes think about this for like movies or whatever, where it's just like, that absolutely makes sense. Obviously, this would happen. You think he's just gonna let them get away with this? God, no, right? I don't know. I thought that was really funny.
They immediately go and he's like, you got the money back, right? Yeah. Well, then why do you care? Because I'm mad, right? Like it's like. Yeah.
But I do think Ocean 13 is legitimately amazing. I really like that one a lot. That one is like the good one in a way.
Yeah. I think it's a toss up whether 11 or 13 is better. 13 has a couple.
Oh, really?
So I think the biggest problem with 13, and this is also a problem with 12, but 12's got bigger problems, is that like becomes a lot like 11 is very good about it being about everyone. I think 13 is a little bit too much about like Danny Ocean and Matt Damon and Brad Pitt.
Oh, see, I actually like that about like 11 is a fun romp, but like it's ultimately pretty, like meaning. You know what I mean? It's just a fun romp. There isn't really anything more going on underneath the surface. There's no themes. There's no character arcs. It's just get a bunch of cool people in a room and watch them do cool shit, and that's fun, right? But 13 actually has that stuff, right? You have this stuff with Matt Damon and his dad. You have this stuff with Danny and wanting to retire, and Rusty. I actually like Rusty quite a bit. This is another reason why I like 12 more than most people, because I like the thing with him and Catherine Zeta-Jones. Because I think Rusty is actually way more interesting than Danny, and I like that he's like a central character, but I want him to be like the guy in a certain sort of sense. And so I like all of his stuff in 13.
Yeah. Okay. That is fair. I just want them to have a little bit more in, right? Like it's like especially like I think guy's name Livingston, the like that part like really, yeah, that part really bothered me, not because like what he did was which people at home that don't know, he like has to like rig a shuffling machine, but he can't do it, so he gets the other computers guy to help him. But like in the process, he puts the whole mission in jeopardy, which feels like very out of character for these guys, right? Like he put his pride before that. But whatever. It's not the. I do like that they brought back the Fox and they don't even like mention him, right? Like they just like zoom in on him, and so if you don't know what's happening, you're like, who the hell is this guy? And what? Um, so I thought a lot of fun. The other movie I watched was watched Kung Fu Hustle, um, with which I hadn't seen before.
Wait, is that the spoof one?
No, that's
No,
Kung Pao
that's
Enter the Fist.
Kung Pao. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ, I'm an idiot.
Kung Fu
I
Hustle
don't think
though
I've seen Kung Fu Hustle then.
is so it is like Kung Pao and that it's a comedy, but it is unlike Kung Pao and that it is like it's like whereas like Kung Pao is kind of like Western cinema making fun of like wuxia, like this is like Eastern cinema using wuxia make a comedy film. Right? It kind of comes across as like how like wuxia's like unrealistic and has like these like over exaggerated like fight scenes. They do that to make do comedy. It basically feels like Looney Tunes, and it's fun in that way. There's some stuff that like doesn't modernize super well. Like one of the characters like is like he's like a kung fu master, but he's kind of effeminate. They like call him a fairy a bunch of times. I don't think that plays is well nowadays, but
Mm.
it's fun. It's super goofy. Like I thought it'd be like because it was just like goofy, it'd be fun to like my parents wanted to watch it. It was like I've heard this is good. And like my dad was just like not having it. It's like this is stupid. But he was like laughing a little bit with it, but it's just like it didn't like play super great for that. But I thought it was entertaining. People really love this movie, and I don't quite get that because like the plot's kind of nonsensical, which is fine, right? Like, it's kind of like you know, an attempt to do like my understanding is this is kind of like an early attempt in kind of cinema space, and for that I'll
Mhm.
give it applause. But like
Oh, okay, so I do know this guy because he's the Shaolin soccer guy.
that would
Which
make sense.
everyone at college always wanted to watch Shaolin soccer, which was like I don't know.
I'll have to put that on the list because I think he had some good stuff in here, but it like just like was very rough, very rough around the edges. Um, but it was fun. Otherwise, I've been playing Neon Abyss, which is just another roguelite. It's
Oh
like
yeah, I know Neo. I know those guys. They're VWoo games or something like that. I think I talked to one of them at PEX.
um, yeah, no, it's a fun game. Um, it's interesting because like how like in roguelikes like you like kind of like are looking fishing for the run where you're overpowered. Um, so this feels good in that that's like basically every run. I think actually Gone Viral does well with this too. To throw some to praise in their direction. Where like if you can survive for long enough, you will eventually build up enough. Like it is more uncommon to have a bad run than it is like in other games. You kind of like fail out fast and you just kind of like
Yeah, no, I super feel that for sure.
um. I think that like for the genre that's fine. But like I think Neon Abyss does a good job of like as the game like you will get overpowered, but you will have to be on your toes in order to deal with like the challenge, which um I think is cool because like a lot of the times with with traditional rogue like the other games, right? Like you'll feel like sometimes like you'll win, but not because you played it well. It's because like you got lucky, which actually makes a lot of sense in kind of the original um uh in the kind of like the original genre, like in like actual like kind of core roguelikes because those are like turn based and you don't have a lot of skill. Like skill does not factor into it nearly as much, especially in like
Mhm.
what NetHack, I think is called. Um, but like the older games, like because they're all turn based, it's you dominating because you got a good roll makes a little bit more sense. But in the action games, you kind of want it to feel like it's because you're performing well, and sometimes it feels like it's just because you've got too powerful. But it does a good job of balancing it. So that's
Yeah,
been
that's actually an interesting thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially when it comes to like Torgas, you like playing through Torgas and like Gone Viral and stuff like that, right? Like where the I feel like there's sort of two pieces of decision making where one of them is sort of like a moment to moment decision and the other is sort of like an overall strategy decision. So okay, so the thing that made me think about this is how StarCraft 2 pros transition to Hearthstone so seamlessly, which seems crazy when you say that, right? Like why would a StarCraft 2 player go to Hearthstone of all games? Because like StarCraft 2 is all about APM and all about, like your ability to like multitask and being timed and Twitch stuff, right? Whereas Hearthstone is all about, it has nothing to do with that stuff, right? Like APM, I mean, sometimes it does, but very rarely matters to that game. And I kind of had this like thought about this for a while, but the epiphany came to me when I was watching Destiny's stream. Destiny was a StarCraft 2 streamer, and he was streaming StarCraft 2 because they had announced that StarCraft 2 wasn't getting, that was functionally shutting down. They're not doing any more paid content. It's sort of on like they're keeping the servers up and they're doing new seasons, right? But they're just like not putting new content into the game, that kind of thing. And so he was like playing a bunch of StarCraft, and I was watching him play a bunch of StarCraft. And it's funny because he was actually getting dumpstered sometimes. Like, he pretty quickly got up to like diamond or plat or whatever. But I was just like watching him get dumpstered by these people who were just had higher like APM than him. And I sort of had this realization that like for StarCraft players, they think of themselves as strategy gamers, right? But a lot of the decisions in StarCraft are these Twitch decisions, like can you think fast enough, and do you have the APM to kind of like execute on it? Whereas in Hearthstone, the decisions you make aren't about do you have enough APM. There are, can you make the right, like, are you making the right strategic play? Can you kind of see, like in a chess sort of way, right? Like, can you sort of like see the future and make those sorts of decisions? And I think that that's a piece of it when it comes to roguelikes, right? And when it comes to these kinds of mechanics where you are shown like a limited set of options, okay, one mutation or another, right? Like here are the two Torghast powers, which one do you take, sort of thing. And it's kind of bled over into a bunch of different places. Even like the battle royale stuff is the same sort of way, right? Like when you come to when you come into a building and there's an AK-47 and a sniper rifle, you get to make that same sort of choice, and sort of like a roguelike choice in a way. I don't know. That's just been something that's on my mind. I don't really have any more concrete thoughts on it than that, though.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because like the choice part of that is, I think, a relatively new innovation for the roguelike like genre. Like a lot of them are like, especially the classic ones, are like kind of like the choices you make are kind of like in like inventory carrying, but like games have generally kind of done away with that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Also, just kind of like there's been a big push towards action roguelikes, right? Like I can count on like one hand maybe the number of like very roguelikes that have like any sort of traction that aren't like the kind of originals. But yeah, no, that makes a lot, like that's definitely an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if I've got anything more. Yeah. The only other thing I did this week of note is Action Button Reviews came out with a review of Pac-Man. I was crowing about them a couple months ago where they did Doom, another 3-hour review where Tim Rogers talks about Pac-Man as kind of like a cultural icon and like different versions of Pac-Man. Part of the thing he does with these reviews, he has like taglines, and the tagline for this one is Pac-Man has come a long way since itself. And then he like proceeds then he proceeds to list off in like for like feels like a solid 10 minutes, right? Like every time somebody in news media has said, video games have come a long way since Pac-Man, it like flashes it across the screen. But it's great content, and I highly recommend anybody go seek it out. I'll link it at the in the show notes. But
that is interesting. Yeah, the thing that I've been watching recently, I watched Kim's Convenience. I went back and I watched all of Kim's Convenience. What a just easy, feel-good show that is. Though I have to say, so for those who don't know, my stepmother is Japanese, and she would kill me if she heard this. And the way that the mom, who is Korean, not Japanese, but also an immigrant, the way that the mom in that show behaves is like so true to life, it like hurts. Like there will be things that happen and I have to stop. I'm just like, oh god, like it's too real. It's too real for me. But like, I don't man, I really just like, I don't know why. I just had the thought. Oh, you know what it was? In the Mandalorian, that actor who's the dad shows up, and he was on Twitter, and it was just like a screenshot of like, oh, he plays this bit part as like a cameo sort of thing. I was like, 2 seasons, or not the final two, but the next two, of Kim's Convenience. And it's just like, what a just like simple, straightforward sitcom doing simple, straightforward stuff. I love it. And then I also went back to I started watching The Sopranos, picking up where I left off in like season 4.
Oh man, we should do that. I need to watch that at some point.
We honestly should do that because, like, honestly, The Sopranos I don't think is it. You can tell it is the genesis of like a lot of this stuff. Like a lot of like the prestige TV stuff that we do comes from The Sopranos, but it also has a lot of growing pains, I guess, from that, like from that era that are very apparent. And it's funny, but it's also just so New Jersey. God, every time they say like Gabagool, I want to die.
My parents love. I think I've said this before. My parents love watching it because it's like where they grew up, right? Like,
yeah, no, I see. I recognize them when they're in Newark, but I don't recognize because it's all in North Jersey, right? Like in Patterson, Fort Henry, across the bridge or whatever. That's where Tony lives. And so like there are some times where I get these like brief flashes of like, oh,
Yeah. But yeah. What's the other? Have you been watching any Mando yet? Because I haven't.
Not. I want to. I keep getting fucking spoiled for shit, obviously, because the Mandalorian has become, it's like Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Like everybody talks about it the day after it airs, and I just kind of I almost like resent it that it behaves that way a little bit.
Apparently, not only do I have to like, I wanted to rewatch season 1, but I also apparently have to watch all of Rebels and like.
Yeah, all of the fucking Clone Wars and just like, Jesus Christ, you guys, Star Wars. I like me some Star Wars, but can we calm the fuck down, please?
We might need to put off our show about our cast about that until like 6 months after it happens, like we did for last year.
Oh, you know what else I've been watching is Summoning Salt for speed runs.
Oh yeah,
just because like, I don't know why he has a great voice and it's amazing to do dishes to, and which is weird. Because when I'm doing dishes, I'm doing it across the wall in that other room, so I'm not watching the speed runs take place. But just like hearing him describe it makes it so easy for me to like do this stuff or whatever. And it's always just like
the latest one was about like the guy who tried to beat all the records, right? Is that right?
Yeah, the guy who was trying to do 32 out of 32 on Super Mario Kart, have all of the time trial world records in 3-lap and fast lap, and he gets to 31 out of 32 7 times before he loses, and he starts, people take these records off of him or whatever. The thing that is crazy to me about these world records is that like they just are constantly going down. Like I just feel like people would eventually optimize like everything, and it would just be impossible to get a faster time, and that is just consistently not the case, which I just find mind-boggling.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think the video is great because it's like a testament to the power of spite. Because like everybody's like, we can't let this guy throw us all up. But I think I generally agree with you about like so the time thing. Like somebody I forget who pointed out that like there's a point in the far flung future where eventually every video game gets beaten at its minimum time, right? Like also like you see some of the conversation around this is like what glitches are accepted and like what category becomes like the competitive category, because like there are like at some point you'll get to a point where like we'll max out a category and kind of uncertain, like in very certain terms, right? It's like you have a glitch that's so powerful that like the milliseconds you can shave off of like getting it done, right? Like like things that are like beat the game in like half a second or whatever, right? Like
no, H Bomber Guy has a really great video about this, where he talks about, which is very different than Summoning Salt, because Summoning Salt does all these retro games, right? He's doing like DK64 speedruns or like like Super Mario Brothers speedruns or whatever. But in H Bomber Guys, he talks about Dark Souls speedruns and how one of the categories uses a glitch that got patched out, and so you literally can't compete in that category unless you have a PS4 that hasn't been updated since whatever, like 2014 or something, right? Like, and so like that category is actually kind of prized in that way because you can't. It's like it's so hard to run it,
Yeah.
because it got patched out or whatever, which I just think is like honestly crazy. Though he also has a bit where he talks about some of the very uncommon speed runs, like a guy who did Mirror's Edge 25 times in a row and it took him 17 hours. Which those are the speed runs I want to watch, right? Like I want to watch those like dedication speed runners where it's not a test of like how quick and do it in 5 minutes. It's a test of can you sit down and do it in one sitting, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, like the weird ones are always like might have been something solved, but somebody did one about like blindfolded Mike Tyson, right?
Oh,
Which
somebody's
is
fault did blindfolded Mike Tyson. I like
which
that
is
one a lot.
this is like or like the video that kind of like got a lot of traction maybe like probably like 8 years ago at this time, which is like the the 2.5 A press like Mario Brothers segment beat, right? Like there was
Yeah. Oh my god.
264.
I watched that whole video and I was just like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah,
Which is the point of watching that video, obviously.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, just like the whole kind of explaining there, but like deep because like thinking about like the tech is super cool to me, right? Like I don't ever have any desire to like run speed runs. Like maybe once in a while I'll be like, okay, this for a little bit, but like under like part of it's like the programming stuff, right? It's like well, why does jumping on the wall in a specific way cause you to jump forward like 30 times? Um, understanding the programming glitches in that kind of way, like DASs are almost more kind of interesting to me because like the human accomplishment part of it's like whatever, who cares, right? Like
yeah.
about manipulating the game state in a way. But yeah, no, it's absolutely fascinating. But we're butting up on the end of our time, but that we run over by a couple of minutes. Do you have anything you want to talk about before we get out of here?
I do have one small thing that I want to plug. Small thing. I'm giving a talk called "Don't Panic: How to Save Your Game from a Buggy Launch" at the Kiev Games Gathering. It is 5 p.m. Kiev time, which is 9 a.m. Pacific. Who knew? On Friday. I don't actually have like a link or anything yet, but I will include. I don't know. Look at my Twitter or something. I guess I'll probably tweet the link out. So that's the big thing that I want to plug for this week.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
Awesome. I don't think I do, but I do want to ask: is the "Don't Panic" a Hitchhiker's Guide reference, or is that just like a thing you said?
To be honest, I've been formal. So this talk is about the Spinch launch, and Spinch had a bunch of bugs on it, on its launch, and is kind of all about how we as a company, me as a community manager, right, like we dealt with that problem, right, like how I was talking to the community, what we were
I think I submitted a
prioritizing.
couple bugs to you like directly.
Yeah, you did actually. One of them was not a bug, by the way. We eventually learned it was because you had played the demo, and the demo uses the same save file, so you had a best time from a demo level that was showing up on your fresh Spinch game. Anyway, that's different. But the point is that so a lot of these talks, a lot of these talks are like how I made my game a huge crazy success, right? But I wanted to do the opposite. It's like, okay, well, when things don't go as planned, when things are tough, what are the strategies that you can use to mitigate the problem, to solve things, to keep your community on your side, that kind of stuff, which I think we did very effectively with Spinch. Like, even though it launched with a million bugs, like, I mean, I was petrified that it was going to be like not No Man's Sky. Obviously, we didn't have that kind of level of like prestige or whatever, but just like running into a situation where everyone's leaving these super negative reviews because they're running into bugs all the time, like that would really suck. And so that we kind of got to the other side without being too damaged. It's like, well, how do I do that? I think that's interesting for people. So there it is. That's the teaser, I guess, the trailer for the talk that I will be giving on Friday.
Sounds awesome. All right. Well, with that, then, what was it? If you want to talk to us, email us about anything talking about on this podcast, you can email us at podcast at somedursplaygames.com or somedursplaygames@gmail.com. God, we skip a week and I can't remember anything. You can watch us at twitch.tv/somedursplaygames. We're live right now. If you're watching this later, come watch us live. Normally we're Mondays at 7 p.m., but this week we had some we had some technical we got some difficulty, so it got pushed back a little bit more. Um, what else? We got all sorts of stuff. There'll be links in the description. Feel free to talk to us anywhere. And since we already did plugs, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.